Okay? But make sure the closing date's realistic. How long do you think it's gonna take you to close this loan, Mr. Lender? Everybody would like a 30-day closing. Is that feasible for you? Okay? It's called communication. What are the closing company requirements? What are the association and condo approval? We talked about that earlier. We have one right now we're working on, like I told you, they only meet on Thursdays. And it's 30 days. The buyer wanted to close 2 weeks earlier. The homeowners association said, we'll try. Okay, cities for city lien letters are now taking up to 15 business days to complete and return. The counties have reduced their staff dramatically. Our taxes haven't gone down to reflect that, but their staff is down to skeleton crews. So their workload has increased a lot. So the days of getting a city lien letter back in 3 days are long gone. So when people are discussing with you on the negotiations, quick closings, you can't just say, yes, it's got a contract, we'll close in 2 weeks, yay! I'd love to be able to promise a 2-week closing, but I can't. I've done my due diligence and the association's gonna take at least 30 days unless you know somebody on the board that we can push it through. Okay, the mortgage person has already said that they're looking at 30 to 45 days. Okay, city lien letters take sometimes up to 2 weeks. We have to allow for at least 10 business days for that. So can we close in 30 days? We'll do everything we can to accommodate that.
And
If we can close earlier, we'll all have another powwow and we'll move the closing date up if all of the other parties have everything that they need.
And they have to check for all the permitting too, right? To make sure nothing bites them in the butt later.
Well, that all depends. Okay, checking on permits really should be the due diligence of the buyer. And it also should be the due diligence of the listing agent when you take a listing. Are there any open permits? One of the questions you should be asking them. If you're taking a walk around a home and you know that they've made some changes to those homes that were not original to that home, closing in a patio, making a porch now a office, enclosing a garage into now a bedroom, adding on an addition of another bathroom. All of those things you have to be asking, did you get permits for these? Well, I don't know, the house was like this when I bought it. So as a listing agent, you need to be asking the questions. Would not also, if you start seeing all of these things being done, I would also pick up the phone and call the zoning department and permit department myself as the listing agent.
If something was done without a permit before they own the house, then what does that mean to you?
As a buyer?
As the listing agent?
Okay, as a listing agent, that
they
would
don't
mean
know.
to me that we should probably be disclosing it. Because if a buyer buys it and doesn't do their due diligence, and we didn't disclose it and we knew it,
They
it
have
could
to
be a
pay.
problem.
No, but we don't know. You just said, they said we bought it like this, so let's say they don't know.
Then
Or
if the
they're
buyer
telling you
does
they
a
don't
permit
know.
search, because it's up to the buyer to do a permit search.
Right.
Unless they put that clause in the contract that states that the seller is responsible. You know the pre-printed things that we have on our contracts? That's one of the clauses that's in there, that we're putting the onus and the responsibility on the seller. Okay, so if you're the listing agent, strike it out or remove it. But if we're the selling agent, we're telling the seller, we want a permit search, and if there's any open permits, you're responsible for closing it. But if the seller says, I don't know, I bought it, we have one right now that we're going
I
through
just
this with.
closed one like that. It never
Yeah.
came up.
Right.
There were no permits. It's not that there was an open permit or an incorrect permit.
They just never pulled them.
I don't know if there's no permit on it. I don't know. Maybe if the house was built in the 50s, maybe.
It's up to
But
the
really,
buyer,
does it mean anything?
only if the buyer
It's not a
finds
title
something
issue.
on down the road. No, it's not a title issue. Title insurance does not cover anything with permits. It's just a courtesy if the title company does the search for you. And there's no coverage for that.
Yeah.
But there have been a couple over the years where the buyer bought the home and the seller didn't know it was this way when I bought it. And if they did know, they didn't tell us. And the buyer came across doing something, went to add something to the house, And it opened up a can of worms, because when they went to the building department came out to inspect a couple of things, and they were like, oh. And then that guy went back and looked and said there weren't permits pulled. And they said to the buyer, you never had permits pulled on this, and it's not up to code. And we're not doing anything now until this is done. The buyer went back to the seller and the listing agent and created a lot of havoc and said, if you guys don't step up and do this, we're gonna sue you. Okay, so it really depends on what happens on down the road. It could maybe never become an issue, which is why that seller's disclosure can cover your butts much more so than not, by if the seller had in there, are there any open permits or any of this? No, or don't know. You can't be held liable. If the seller told you and you said, all right, well, we'll see if the buyer says anything, then yeah, you could be in trouble if it becomes an issue on down the road. Not everything will. What you have to do is do everything you can along the way to try and tighten up that gap, so if anything does happen, you don't want your errors and omissions policy to have to kick in. Okay? So permits have always been a sore spot. As a selling agent and a buyer, if there was anything in that house that would make me think, I'd be doing my due diligence and I'd be calling and I'd be finding out if anything, is there anything open? Is there anything that, if they say no, there's been no permits, and you know for sure there was stuff done in that house that there were no permits, I'd be going right back to that listing agent saying, before we put an offer on this house, we need to talk. Okay, and if the seller's not willing to do anything or step up and have it brought up to code or close out permits, permits are not, some of them are not inexpensive to have to close out. So, that could become a bone of contention on down the road or during the contract process.
It could reveal itself during an appraisal.
Yes, exactly, that's right.
And then when you get the lender's gonna have an appraisal of it, most of the loans are gonna be financed, the appraiser comes upon it, then all the mud's gonna hit the wall and,
And here you are thinking you're gonna be having a check coming in 2 weeks, and your husband and you have already decided where it's gonna go, and you just go, huh? What? Now, Ron, when you bring that up, Ron Falciano was an appraiser for how many years, Ron?
well, I still am for 30.
Okay, actively still for 30 years. How does it come up in an appraisal?
Well, you were just doing an inspection and you start asking questions usually of the homeowner, and some things don't look right, then you'll go ahead and you'll
Do a little more
do a little
digging.
more digging at the city. And then you'll find out that, that bathroom or what have you, there was no permit for it, or the enclosed garage, because you have to step down into the now bedroom that used to be a garage. Well, that's not functional because it should be the same level of the slab, should be the same level, but it's not. How did that come about happening? And you start doing, some research. So now that extra bedroom as an appraiser is illegal. So I have to count that as a garage, not as additional living area, but you sold it as a 3,000 square foot house, but it's really only 2640 square feet. So then all kinds of bad things happen to the realtor. I'm only getting a couple $100 to do the appraisal. But you got a big commission, you got buyers and sellers, everyone's emotionally invested, and now bad things happen. And I've had.
Yeah, and there's always a discrepancy with the square footage.
Yeah.
That's always
I
a
know, 'cause
tip
I
off.
bought a house that
Because
has an
Eric went and
permit.
did an inspection and he saw the chalk line. They're usually gone
And my
after,
appraiser said
after it's an old
this room
addition.
wasn't permitted, and I said, is it gonna appraise? And I said, is it gonna appraise without the room? And he said, yeah, and I said, I don't care. And I bought the house, but the roof is the same, cause it used to be part of the patio, so it's never gonna be an issue unless we sell it and the other person.
None of these things Doreen's talking about are ever a problem till they become a problem.
Mhm.
Right.
And then once they become a problem, then
You turn it back
the
into
attorney's
patio.
gonna nitpick the contract, and then this is gonna be an issue. Well, I only made, this was no big deal,
Yeah.
and that becomes an issue.
Yeah.
Before you know it, your credibility is out the door. So it's
Yeah.
best up front. And even with that, I appraised properties for years.
Yeah.
And back in the old days when you had film, one day I did 6 appraisals in one day. I had all the photos of the comparables, the subject on one camera. and I thought I took the film out, and I opened up the camera, and all the film was exposed. I had to spend an entire Saturday calling people up, going back and redoing everything that I did. So it was one of those things, like Doreen talked about earlier, never opened up that camera again. Ever, never, until I was positive. Now, today it's digital and whatnot,
Yeah.
but back, and some of these things, no matter how much you try to box to make sure, there's always an issue that you couldn't have foreseen and something happens.
Yeah, and even on that seller disclosure, a lot of the sellers say don't know. They know, so check yourself.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to be responsible, they just want to scoot through, get to the end of the deal and be done and have it be the buyer's problem.
And they'll take the chance that it will not become a problem.
Right,
So the reason why we're doing this today is to help you control what you can control. Because like Ron said, there are some things that will come up that are unforeseen. But there are a lot of things that you can control and avoid from asking the right questions, gathering the right information, gathering the right documentation, crossing all of the T's, dotting all of the I's, and communicating effectively.
Yeah.
And diligently and persistently. So there's things that happen, and that which is why our profession is the profession that it is. We do earn our fees, and it's up to us to explain why. They think we just take them around in the car, we find a house, and our job is done. Or we put a sign in the front and put it in the MLS, and our job is done. That's because 75% of the agents do that, but not us. Okay, check whether or not the contract is assignable. There's always a clause in there that it's assignable or not, or with any release of liability or no release of liability. There should only really be a couple of reasons why a contract would be assignable. If a husband and wife are buying a house together, or a couple is buying a house together, and they have not, one of them hasn't seen the home, the other one flew down, I love this house, and then, okay, I'm gonna go to contract, but I want my husband to see it first. So I'm putting a clause in there that it's subject to, within the next 48 hours, my husband seeing it. Or they can take title, they can go, in this market, we as an agent could say, I don't really think that 48 hours to 72 hours is a wise thing, because there's gonna be other offers on this home. And we wanna tighten this up as much as possible with as few contingencies for the seller. So I would prefer that we just go to contract with your name, check that you can assign it and put it into your husband's name, and move on from there. So there's different reasons why. If you ever have a question, come to me or your sales manager or your office administrator first, before you just go ahead and blindly do that. Or as a listing agent, just go ahead and just accept it from someone else, because you didn't scour the contract line by line. Okay, financing, check whether cash or if they're obtaining financing, obviously. If there's to be a loan with a financing contingency, make sure you indicate and check whether conventional, FHA, or VA, and the time frame for approval. And remember what we said, make sure the dates make logical sense and sequence to the closing date. Okay, I had one the other day, they gave 45 days for the mortgage approval and 30 days for closing. Okay, how's that gonna work? All right. Check whether it's fixed or adjustable. And also put in the principal amount of the loan or the percentage. I see some of them coming through as 80% instead of the actual dollar amount. It just says 80%, because depending on the offer price and what the actual contract price ends up being, it's still going to be 80%, and that eliminates having to change the mortgage amount and the math and have that all initial. So if you put in conventional 80% on the front, okay, you just put 80% on the front part where the math is, you can leave that if the price changes from offer to
So you're okay
agreement.
with that, 80%?
Yes. Okay. Let's see. Make sure you check whatever addenda are applicable. Oh my goodness, I cannot tell you how many contracts come through where the addendums are not checked off. HOA, condo. Those are really the two biggest ones. The only other addendums that are on though are special circumstances, backup contract, subject to sale of home, FHA, VA, all of that. But you have to make sure if there's addendums that are necessary, they need to be checked on the contract, that they are a part of the contract. Make sure all parties to the contract initial the bottom of every page, sign and date, and the listing and sales associate. Make sure all the addendums that are a part of the contract are initialed and signed and submitted with the offer and the finalized contract. Be as neat as possible, or type it so it looks professional and legible. This is just a second page, a little thing on the lender's loan package. I'll tell you how old this document is and how long I've been teaching this class. It says, with the advent of fax machines. So now we have, everything is scanned, okay, digitally. But closers are able to provide preliminary settlement statements. The loan packages are supposed to, with this new TRID regulation, supposed to be in the hands of the closer a lot sooner than what they probably still are being given. But a lot of things can turn up at the last minute, requirements when the loan package arrives. So my instruction or mentoring to you would be is to set the expectations with the buyers and sellers right up front. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I want to let you know we're about a week and a half away from closing. We're just about there. Everything's going smoothly, but I just want to let you know, sometimes things can happen. The lender can come in with some additional requirements that we're not anticipating, and if it does, I'll keep you posted, but I don't want you to panic. Okay? It happens. So when you set that expectation, and then it happens, you say, remember, Anna, when I called you last week and I said that a specific requirement is something could happen? It did, but don't think you're special. This happens a lot. So the way you handle things is going to be how they receive it and react. Don't worry about it. We've got it under control. Okay, we're working on it. The title company's got it all under control. I don't foresee any situations, but I just wanted to keep you updated. Okay. The settlement statement. I want you to make sure that you advise the office administratively wise, as well as the title company and the lender, if the closing date changes. Didn't we just go through this?
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
Unbelievable.
It's like, oh, I forgot to tell everybody that the closing date was moved up 2 weeks.
So the wire didn't go out. I was not notified. So the agent called me in a panic and I said, oh, we're not closing till the end of the month. Oh no, the date's been moved to tomorrow or this morning.
This morning.
Right when I walk in the door at 8 o'clock.
Mhm.
I
So-
said,
So I'm driving to work and Lisa's on the phone, Doreen! And I said, oh, okay. So how did this happen? Well, she forgot to. So when the agent came in a panic into my office, I said, I bet you won't do this again. I said, you have to understand the domino effect. I said, if the closing date changes, you have to alert everybody. There's a lot of things that are hinging on that closing date. So we ended up jumping through hoops and got it done, but
it
again,
was close.
it was very close. And I said to her,
at 10.
that's right, the closing was at 10 o'clock. So I told her, I said, I just want to let you know, you need to get on the phone with everybody and explain to them. We might be moving the closing to 4 o'clock today. Okay, because we have no funding yet. So we have to make sure that all of this happens. And thankfully the wire came in almost instantly after it was sent, which is unusual. Okay, so in that respect, she was like, oh my God. Okay, so again, you don't want to have worked very diligently and hard with a client and everything's been going along, and then the day of closing, oops,
Yeah, they'll never call you back again.
right? Because so many things could have gone wrong that day that created a lot of stress for everybody. Okay, what if the seller had a moving company in their driveway ready to go, and their closing is at 10 o'clock and they're waiting for their funds, and now you call them, we're probably not going to close until 4 o'clock today. Okay, you think that would have been handled very easily? No. Could that have been avoided very easily? Absolutely. We could tell you stories. Okay, and then the settlement statement. Like I said, advise the closer of any changes and your administrative office, because a lot hinges on your dates. Provide any inspections or repair bills ahead of time so they can be incorporated into the settlement statement that the lender allows it. Confirm the deposit and commission. You'll want to make sure you get paid. Always confirm with the closing company. I will tell you this, as soon as you go to contract, you should have my friend's house that I just did, the other agent, I was so impressed, sends me within 24 hours a whole email, sent it to everybody in the transaction, a whole contact list of everybody involved in the transaction.
Smart.
The title company, the mortgage person, and their phone numbers and email addresses, the listing agent, the selling agent, the buyer and the seller. I was like, I picked up the phone, I said, Edwin, I'm impressed. I said, this is fantastic. I can't tell you how many times I've gone back to that because I've had to get something or get a phone number and this and that. So, but again, you want to call the title company and introduce yourself. Hi, I'm Doreen with Lang Realty. Just want to introduce myself. I'm representing the buyer. I want you to make sure that you have my contact information. I would also like you to tell me exactly what you're charging the buyer. I want to know what the closing fee is going to be. I want to know any other miscellaneous fees that you're going to be putting onto the buyer. That's the time to find out. If they say, yeah, the closing fee is going to be $750 for the buyer, and say, oh, really? Can we talk? I'd like to talk to you about that. That's quite high. Compared to everybody I work with, that's quite high. Can you explain to me how I explain to my buyer why a $700? In other words, you need to be in charge and in communication. And you might be able to get a couple of $100 shaved off. Then you go back to your buyer and say, Julie, just want to let you know, I'm a hero today. Saved you $300. Let me tell you how. Okay? But introduce yourself and tell them, just want to let you know, my commission is 3% and my transaction fee is $350. Please make sure it's on the closing statement. You do not want the title company not to have it on there because you forgot to tell them, and the title company didn't do their due diligence and actually pick up the phone and call you. They just prepared the HUD. Nobody told me about a transaction fee. I'm good to go. And then you get to the closing, and you didn't do your due diligence and say, I would like a closing statement in advance and I'd like to take a look at it. Because that's the time to be able to call the title company and say, just want to let you know my transaction fee, compliance fee is not on there. Please change that now. And you want to do this before they give the final figure to the buyer.
Yeah, otherwise you'll be paying for it.
Yeah.
Because you're certainly not going to go back to your client and ask for it.
I've had this several times happen, where the agent will come to me and say, Doreen, I forgot to tell the title company about the $350, so they didn't charge it. And I'd be like, and? Well, I don't want to really go back to the buyer and ask for it now. And I'd say, well, here's the deal. Either the title company calls them back and says, I'm really sorry, I didn't put it on, but they're probably not going to do that because there's a mortgage and they're not going to have a whole new closing package come in because now we have to disclose that and have to have a 3-day compliance from the lender and a new closing statement and everybody come back and sign it. So I'm thinking that's not going to happen. Or you're going to need to call the buyer and ask for the $350, and they're like, oh, and I'd say, or
Eat it.
it's on you. Bet you won't make that one again. So you want, you don't want it to cost you, so effectively communicate with everybody and make sure that you follow it up in an email so that they can say to you, you never told me that. Say, actually at 1:17 on March 23rd, I sent you an email and you replied. Okay. Okay. All right. Provide a copy of your net sheet. That would be a nice thing to do. I don't know how effective that is anymore with supplying that to the closing agent, other than it gives them a template to look at of what you've disclosed. But you should always be doing a net sheet for your sellers.
What's a net sheet?
A net sheet is this is what your sales price is. It's called an estimated. I highlight estimated, by the way. It's an estimated net sheet. And you're going to put the sales price, you're going to put what the real estate professional fee is, the compliance fee, their documentary stamps, their closing fee, their city lien searches, their prorations, all of that. You pretty much go down that whole sheet and pretty much tell them what they're going to be walking away with at the table.
It's in app files too.
Yeah, it's in app files. I also have, if you would like me to email you, I do have Excel sheets set up with that. One's with a formula, one's without. So it actually gives two proposed, you should do it at your listings, two proposed prices of what you think the market value is. It could be $260, it could be $255, right in that area. And based upon that, this is what you'll net. Okay? And the formula one, as you start adding the fees to it, it does the math. All right, but that's an important tool for you to have and for your seller to look at. Okay. And advise your closer of any rents or service contracts to be prorated. This comes up a lot of times at the last minute, where the seller will say, well, what about my appliance contract? And you're like, well, what about it? Well, I have an appliance contract. You never asked me about it, but I've had it in my file. I would have given it to you. I want the buyer to be able to assume it, which means we have to now give it to the title company. That closing statement has to be redone, and they have to call the appliance contract company to confirm it, and then they prorate it. So the buyer is buying out the unused portion of the service contract. Okay, there's a lot of service contracts out there. That should be one of the questions you ask at your time of your listing. That could be a selling feature too. You can put that in your remarks. Seller will,
Charge you for.
extend you. Well, no,
I have one of those right now.
yeah. Well, I have a seller.
Where do you put $100 for your?
Right, it's, you know what, and if they cancel the policy with the compliance contract company, the appliance contract company takes anywhere from $50 to $100 in a processing fee to do it, so they're actually better off having it assumed by the buyer.
Well, what do we
The
put
buyer
that
got
in the
mad and went,
contract?
keep it, I don't want it.
Right, so, you'd be surprised. The seller I have, I asked her, do you have an appliance contract? She said, yes. I said, well, was one of two ways we can go. We can have the buyer assume it and pay you back at the time of closing. I said, when was the last time you paid it? She says, oh, I paid it in December. I said, okay, so you probably have, it's probably what, a $400 policy? She said, yeah, about $350. I said, okay, so here's, we can have the seller assume it, and they pay you back the unused portion at the time of closing. I said, or we can just, she says, throw it in. She goes, let them have it. I said, okay, they'll be very delighted.
So where do you put this in the contract?
You can actually put that in the contract, seller to provide appliance contract at no cost to the buyer will assume it. Okay? All right, well, you put it in your listing agreement, your listing agreement, and you also put it in your listing features, so that the brokers see that there's
Right, on
a
MLS,
service
right.
warranty on all the appliances, and the seller's going to extend it to the, the remaining portion to the buyer. Okay, and this is what we went over earlier. Advise the closer ahead of time if any party will not be present for closing, and provide the information on how they can be contacted. Okay. This I gave you so that you can take it with you, because I know we're running over, so I want to get you out of here. This is a closing checklist for you to utilize. If you would like, staple it into your file on the left-hand side and go through it so that you can check off what you're responsible for, what you know the other agent is responsible for, and make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Did you get one, Sangeeta?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have an extra?
I do. And also, these are the other checklists I was talking about. The buyer under contract checklist, the listing under contract checklist, and the new listing checklist. I've got you covered. Use what you want, use what you don't want, modify it.
Thank you.
I'm a checklist kind of person, and when you're in a business that requires a lot of time-sensitive dates,
Great. Anybody have one?
a lot of things that need to be done, make sure you follow your lists and you won't get into any, hopefully, trouble.
I got a new. Oh, they were a packet.
Yes, it's a packet.
Well, we got messed up.
pages.
Yeah, I just
So
got
you
one
can split
new,
it up.
one buyer, and one listing.
There's three.
Listing here, that's what you're missing.
Got them?
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody have any questions on anything? You're all like,
None?
I'm going to work at Macy's. So I hope you learned something in here today that you can take with you and
Oh, man.
apply, and hopefully you'll
Yeah.
avoid a lot of pitfalls by effective communication and due diligence on all of the tasks necessary. But again, you need to be letting your buyers and sellers know why you are an investment and not an expense. Okay?
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doreen.
Thanks, Doreen.
Have a great day. Thanks, Ron.
He said, just give me a sheet,